Hello, I'm Peter. I'm so glad you could join me for tonight's journey. Where are you listening from tonight? The Midwest, the South, or perhaps some quiet corner of the countryside? Wherever you may be, let's settle in and listen to this story together. Tonight, we begin with something a little darker, a little colder than usual. It was a time of biting winds, burning debts, and bone-deep cold. We're diving into what life was really like inside the winter camps of Native Americans on the Great Plains, long before modern heating changed what it meant to be human. Forget the romanticized freedom and the noble solitude Hollywood sold you. Forget the image of the lone warrior standing effortlessly against the storm. The truth. Standing alone on those plains without the complex web of debts and favors we're about to explore, you probably wouldn't last a single night. Before your eyes get heavy if you find comfort in our time together, consider supporting the channel with a like or a subscription. Think of it as a quiet nod of hello, no obligation at all. And do tell me, where in the world are you tonight? Always marvel at how we can all be connected under the same night sky, finding rest at the same moment, no matter the distance between us. Now, dim the lights. Maybe pull that blanket a little tighter, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The heart of winter, deep winter. The kind of cold that makes the world forget the meaning of warmth. You stand on the Great Plains of North America. The year is of little consequence. 1750, 1650 perhaps, centuries before European sails ever graced these horizons. The date is not what defines this moment. The cold defines it. 30 degrees below zero, Fahrenheit. And that's just the air temperature. Just the number that would appear on a thermometer if thermometers existed here, which they don't. When the wind picks up, and the wind always picks up on the plains, always without fail, without mercy, it feels like 50 below, 60 below. This is not the kind of cold you've experienced waiting for your car to warm up on a winter morning. This is not the cold of a broken heater or a drafty window. This is not even the cold of the worst winter storm you've ever endured in your warmest coat. This is something else entirely. And yet, in this world of frozen death, where modern humans with all their technology, with their synthetic fabrics and chemical hand warmers and GPS devices, would struggle to survive even with the best equipment, entire communities of Native Americans not only lived, but thrived. Families of 8, 10, sometimes 12 people sleeping together, living together, surviving together in structures made of nothing more than wooden poles and buffalo hides stitched together with thread made from animal sinew. No brick, no mortar, no concrete foundations or insulated walls, no furnaces, no thermostats, no electric heaters, no central heating systems, no backup generators, no emergency services to call if something went wrong. Just engineering so elegant, so perfectly adapted to its environment, so thoroughly refined over thousands of years of trial and error and accumulated wisdom that it puts our modern understanding of portable architecture to absolute shame. But survival wasn't just about engineering. It was about something deeper. How people organized themselves, who got to be warm and who endured cold. The invisible bonds of obligation and reciprocity that were just as essential as the walls themselves. It cannot be. There are limits, physical limits, limits imposed by the environment, by the available resources, by the brutal mathematics of survival. So warmth must be rationed, distributed, allocated according to need and function and social obligation. Someone somehow must decide how to divide the finite warmth among people who all desperately need it. And the way these communities solve that problem, the invisible architecture of relationships and debts and reciprocity that kept everyone alive. The social contracts written not on paper, but in the very temperature gradients of their winter camps, is perhaps more remarkable than the physical architecture of the tipis themselves. Beyond the fascinating engineering of the tipi lies a more complex reality. We need to understand why a chief's fire roared with hardwood while his neighbors burned dried dung. This wasn't oppression. It was a carefully calibrated inequality designed for one thing: collective survival. We're going to understand that survival, real survival in a harsh world, is never just about you. It's never about individual strength or cleverness or will. It's always about us, about community, about what we owe each other and what we can expect in return, about the bonds that hold us together when everything else is trying to tear us apart. Now let's drift back through the years, back through the decades and centuries, back to a time when winter was not an inconvenience to be managed with a thermostat, but a test to be passed with knowledge and community and courage. A time when survival required not just skill, but cooperation, not just strength, but wisdom. Back to the frozen plains, where the tipis of Native Americans stood in circles against the endless wind, and where warmth was never a right, but always a gift, carefully earned and gratefully shared. Let's begin. Step with me now, out of your time and onto the surface of a vast frozen ocean. Not an ocean of water, but of grass and ice. It is 1680, long before the iron horse carved its path through these lands, long before fences turned the wild into property. Here the horizon is a perfect, unbroken circle, and you are the only heartbeat in a world of silence. The landscape around you is vast beyond comprehension, beyond description really. If you've lived your whole life among trees, among buildings, among things that break up the horizon and give you reference points and sense of scale, you cannot fully imagine what it means to stand on the plains in winter. It's like standing in the middle of an ocean. Except the ocean is frozen solid and stretches in every direction until earth and sky blur into one continuous sheet of white and pale blue. There are no landmarks, no distinctive features, just flatness extending to infinity. The horizon is a perfect circle around you, equidistant in all directions, and you are the center of a world that seems to have no edges. There are no trees here, not real trees, not the kind that grow tall and provide shelter from sun or wind or rain. The plains are treeless, not because nothing tries to grow, but because conditions won't allow it. There's not enough rain. The wind never stops battering any tall growth. Fire sweeps across the grass every few years, lightning sparked or deliberately set, killing saplings before they can mature into full trees. There are only small bushes, scrub willow near the rare creek beds, stunted things that grow sideways more than up. Cottonwood trees bent and twisted by the constant wind, growing in small groves where water collects, in depressions in ravines, in the few places protected enough for them to survive. But mostly, there's just grass, or rather, what's left of grass. Because in winter, the grass is dead, brown, lifeless, buried under snow that's been packed down by wind and time until it's hard as stone, so hard you can walk on it without breaking through, leaving barely a footprint. The sky above is a pale, washed-out blue. Not the rich, deep blue of summer. Not the vibrant blue that makes you want to lie on your back and stare up into infinity. This is a thin blue, a cold blue. The kind of blue that happens when the air is so cold, so dry, that there's almost no moisture in it to scatter light. It's a hard sky, a sharp sky, a sky that offers no comfort, no softness, no mercy. The sun, when it rises, provides light, but almost no warmth. It sits low on the southern horizon, even at midday, its rays striking the snow at such a shallow angle that they seem to just glance off the surface, reflecting back into space, without transferring any meaningful heat to the frozen world below. It just sits there, pale and distant, like a cold eye, watching, judging, offering nothing. And the wind. The wind is constant, not gusting, not today. There are days when it gusts, when it howls, when it screams across the plains like a living thing bent on destruction. But today, it's just blowing, steady, always blowing. From the west usually, sometimes from the northwest, bringing even colder air down from the far north. It never truly stops on the plains. Even on calm days people call windless, there's always at least a breeze, always movement, always that slight pressure against your face, your body, the reminder that the air itself is hostile. In deep winter, that wind is your enemy, your constant, unrelenting enemy. It strips away heat from any exposed surface. It finds every gap in your clothing, every opening, every weakness in your defenses against the cold. It makes the cold so much worse. The air might be 30 below, but with the wind it feels like 50 below, 60 below. The wind chill, they'd call it now, with their modern meteorology and their calculations. But the people living here didn't need a name for it. They didn't need numbers or formulas. They just knew. They felt it in their bones. They understood it in a way that went deeper than knowledge, deeper than conscious thought. You're standing about 200 paces from the camp looking at it. 200 paces is far enough to see the whole circle of dwellings, to understand the layout, the organization, the structure of the community. But not so far that you can't make out details, can't see individual lodges, can't observe the life happening there. And what you see is remarkable. The tipis are arranged in a circle, not a perfect circle, because perfection is neither necessary nor possible in the real world, but close enough. Perhaps 30 lodges, maybe 35. Each one is a cone of hide rising from the snow like a monument to human ingenuity, like a mountain in miniature, like a statement against the flatness, the emptiness, the vast horizontal expanse of the plains. From this distance, in the flat light of winter afternoon, when the sun provides illumination without shadow, they almost don't look real. They look like drawings, like simplified representations of shelter. Just triangles against the snow. Geometric shapes that seem too perfect, too regular to be actual dwellings, where actual people live and sleep and eat and love and argue and dream. But as you walk closer, crunching through the snow with each step, your breath forming clouds that immediately freeze and fall away, details emerge. The tipis become real, three-dimensional, complex. You can see that each tipi is made from many pieces of hide, sewn together with meticulous care. The seams are visible as faint lines running down the surface, vertical lines, where the edges of individual buffalo hides meet. Some of the hides are pale, almost white, from animals that lived and died in different seasons or different years. Others are darker, more tan or brown, creating a subtle patchwork across each structure. Each lodge is a mosaic, though the pieces are large and carefully matched to create a surface that's as uniform as possible. You can see smoke rising from most of the lodges. Not thick smoke, not the billowing clouds you'd associate with a big fire. Just thin streams barely visible against the pale sky, rising straight up from the smoke holes at the peak of each cone until the wind catches them and pulls them sideways, spreading them across the camp in a thin haze that hangs maybe 10 feet off the ground. You can see that snow has been piled around the base of each tipi, creating a wall perhaps 2 feet high all the way around the circumference. But there's something odd about it, something that catches your attention even at this distance. The snow doesn't touch the hide directly. There's a gap, 6 inches, maybe 8 inches between the snow and the leather. A space. And that space, you realize, is intentional, carefully maintained, essential to the function of these structures in ways you don't yet fully understand, but will soon. As you get closer, still close enough now that you can hear sounds from the camp, the occasional voice, a dog barking, the soft thud of something being dropped, you begin to understand the scale. These are not small structures. These are not temporary, flimsy shelters thrown together in haste. Each tipi is perhaps 15, 16 feet across at the base. The poles rise 20 feet into the air, maybe more, converging at a point high above, crossing and supporting each other in a structure that's both simple and sophisticated. The entire interior probably encloses a space as large as a modern bedroom. Maybe larger, certainly large enough for 8 or 10 people to sleep comfortably, to move around without constantly bumping into each other, to live with some measure of dignity and privacy despite the close quarters. And they're beautiful in a stark, functional way. There's no unnecessary decoration visible from outside, not in winter. Summer tipis might have paintings on the exterior, geometric designs, or pictographic representations of important events. But winter tipis are plain unadorned because decoration serves no functional purpose and might even interfere with the hide's ability to shed water and block wind. Yet the proportions are perfect. The angle of the walls, the height of the peak, the way the smoke flaps extend from the top like ears or wings. Everything about them suggests careful thought, centuries of refinement, countless small adjustments made by countless anonymous builders over countless generations until the design reached this final form. You approach the nearest tipi. It belongs to a family you've come to know, though that knowledge comes from our imagination, from our journey back through time. A woman named Red Willow Woman. Her husband, Tall Elk, their 4 children, and Tall Elk's elderly mother. 8 people live in this space. 8 human beings, plus 2 dogs who sleep inside during winter, plus all their possessions, their food stores, their tools, their lives. The entrance is a gap in the hide covered by a separate flap. The door, though door is too modern a word for it. The flap is heavy. You can see that even from here, from the way it hangs, from how it doesn't flutter in the wind like lighter fabric would. It's made from multiple layers of hide, sewn together with the hair left on the inner surface for insulation. The entrance flap isn't just a cover. It's a crucial part of the thermal envelope, the boundary between survivable interior and lethal exterior. You reach out and touch the outer wall of the tipi. Slowly, respectfully. The leather is cold under your hand. Cold and slightly stiff, though not frozen rigid. Buffalo, Hide brain-tanned and smoked, treated with fat to make it water-resistant. Your fingers, even through your mittens, can feel the texture. Your fingers trace the line of a seam where two hides have been stitched together with sinew thread, so fine and strong that the joint is almost invisible. You have to look closely to even see the line of stitches, and even then you can barely feel them. The work is that precise, that skilled. You notice something else. The hide is not perfectly smooth. There's a very slight texture to it, a grain like all leather has, like the leather of your shoes, or your belt, or your gloves. But it's also slightly fuzzy, because even though this hide has been scraped and worked until it's thin and supple enough to drape properly, there's still a microscopic layer of fiber on the surface. That fiber, combined with the natural oils in the leather oils that were rubbed in during the tanning process, helps shed water. When snow lands on the tipi and melts slightly during the day, during those few hours when the winter sun has any strength at all, the water beads up and runs down rather than soaking in. The hide breathes, allowing moisture vapor to escape from inside, but it doesn't absorb liquid water. It's similar in function to modern waterproof breathable fabrics, except this material was developed thousands of years ago through observation and experimentation and accumulated knowledge. You walk slowly around the circumference of the lodge, your hand trailing along the surface. About 3/4 of the way around, you notice something. The hides on this side are slightly darker, slightly more weathered. The texture is different, rougher, more worn. This is the side that faces the prevailing wind, the side that takes the brunt of weather, the side where rain drives horizontally during storms, where snow piles highest, where the wind batters constantly. The hides here are replaced more often, you know. Every few years, they wear out from constant exposure and need to be patched or replaced entirely. The women who own and maintain these lodges know exactly which hides need attention, can tell by touch and sight. When a section is weakening, can predict when repairs will be needed. At the back of the tipi, directly opposite the entrance, the snow has been piled especially high, 3 feet high, maybe more. This is the side that needs the most protection from wind, the side where the sleeping platform is located inside, the side where the most vulnerable members of the family, the very old and the very young, will sleep tonight. The extra snow provides extra insulation and additional barrier against the killing cold. Now, let's step inside. You move back around to the entrance. You call out softly, announcing yourself. It's rude to enter without warning, even in our imaginary journey. A voice from inside responds, welcoming you. The voice is muffled by the heavy door flap, but audible. Warm, human. You push aside the entrance flap. It's heavier than you expected, much heavier, because it's not just hide. It's multiple layers, 3 or 4 layers, of thick buffalo leather sewn together, and between those layers is insulation. Dried grass in some lodges, cattail down in others, sometimes even shredded bark or moss. The entire flap probably weighs 30 pounds, maybe more. It takes real effort to move it aside, effort that speaks to the importance of this barrier, this threshold between outside and inside, between death and life. As you duck through the opening, pushing your way past the heavy leather, feeling it brush against your back and shoulders, you feel it immediately. Warmth, not blazing heat, not the aggressive, almost uncomfortable warmth of a fire built high, but a gentle, miraculous envelope of warmth that's perhaps 40, maybe 50 degrees warmer than the air outside. Think about that for a moment. Really think about it. You were in air that was 30 degrees below zero. Now, as you let the entrance flap fall back into place behind you, sealing shut with a soft thump, you're in air that's perhaps 20 degrees above zero. Maybe warmer. Maybe as warm as 30 degrees. It's enough. It's the difference between death and life. The difference between your body slowly shutting down and your body functioning normally. The difference between despair and hope. Your eyes take a moment to adjust to the dimness. After the bright reflected light from snow outside the interior seems dark at first, almost pitch black. You blink, wait, let your pupils dilate. And slowly, gradually, the space reveals itself. There's light coming from two sources. One is the fire in the center of the space, though it's burning low right now, just steady flames and glowing coals, not a roaring blaze. The other is light filtering through the smoke hole at the top, a circle of pale sky, visible high above a connection to the outside world, a window to the heavens. As your vision adjusts, as shapes emerge from shadows, the interior of the tipi reveals itself in all its elegant complexity. The first thing you notice is the liner. 7 feet up from the ground, all the way around the interior, there's a second wall, an inner wall. It's made from buffalo hides in this lodge, though in some wealthier lodges it might be made from cloth, traded from other tribes. Fine fabric that's even more effective at blocking drafts. This inner wall, this liner doesn't reach all the way to the ground. It stops about a foot above the floor. And it doesn't reach all the way to the peak. It stops at about 7 feet high, leaving the upper portion of the tipi open, creating a clear space between the liner and the outer wall. Between the outer hide wall and this inner liner, there's a space, 6 inches, maybe 8 inches of empty air. And that space is everything. That space is the secret. That space is what makes winter survival possible. It's filled with dead air, trapped air, air that can't circulate, can't move, can't carry heat away through convection. Dead air is one of nature's best insulators. Better than most materials humans have invented, better than fiberglass or foam or any synthetic insulation. Air itself, when prevented from moving, is almost perfect at preventing heat transfer, and this entire tipi is wrapped in a continuous layer of it, a thermal envelope that surrounds the living space like an invisible cocoon. But it's not just passive insulation. The system is elegant, and it moves. It's dynamic, it works. Look down at the base of the liner. See how it extends down to the ground, where it's held in place by smooth river stones. Those stones create a seal. Not a perfect seal, because perfect seals are neither possible nor desirable, but close enough. Cold air that seeps in under the outer walls, and cold air must seep in, because the fire needs oxygen to burn, and people need oxygen to breathe. That cold air hits the liner and stops. It can't rise. It's trapped at floor level by the barrier of the liner. But the fire needs that cold air, needs the oxygen it contains. So there's a channel. In some lodges, it's just the narrow space under the edge of the liner, a gap of an inch or two that allows air to flow across the floor toward the fire. In the most sophisticated lodges, and this is one such lodge, there's actually a small trench dug into the ground, running from outside the tipi under the edge of the outer wall all the way to the fire pit. A tunnel, an air duct. Air flows through this trench, feeding the fire with fresh oxygen while staying at floor level where it can't rob heat from the living space above. The cold air hits the fire and is heated instantly. Hot air rises, obeying the fundamental physical law that governs so much of how the world works. It rises up past the 7-foot mark, where the liner ends into the upper portion of the tipi, into that space between the liner and the outer wall. It circulates there, warming the space, warming the hides, warming everything it touches. Then, as it cools slightly, as it gives up its heat to the surfaces around it, it's drawn toward the smoke hole and exits, pulled by the draft by the wind outside, creating a pressure differential by the natural chimney effect that moves air from low to high. It's a convection system, a natural chimney, a passive climate control mechanism that works continuously without any mechanical assistance, without any input or adjustment or attention, as long as the fire burns. As long as there's a temperature difference between inside and outside, the system works. It works in still air, it works in high wind, it works day and night, it just works. The temperature gradient in this space is remarkable, precise, carefully managed without any conscious management. At floor level, near where the cold air enters, it might be barely above freezing. 35 degrees, 40 degrees, cold enough that you wouldn't want to sit there for long. At chest height, where people sit and work, where they spend most of their waking hours, it's comfortable. 50 degrees, 60 degrees, warm enough to function without heavy clothing. Up near the smoke hole in that upper space that serves as a heat reservoir, it's even warmer, 70 degrees, sometimes more, sometimes approaching 80 degrees on the coldest nights when the fire burns hottest. Your eye follows the smoke from the fire. It rises in a column straight up, pulled by that convection current, by that invisible flow of air. Near the top, it passes through the smoke hole, which isn't just a hole. It's carefully shaped, carefully designed, carefully thought out. And it has flaps, 2 triangular extensions of hide that extend from the opening, that can be controlled by poles from outside, that can be adjusted to create exactly the right amount of draft for the conditions. Right now, they are angled to create a venturi effect, a narrowing of the opening that increases the speed of airflow that pulls smoke out even in still air. On windy days, they can be adjusted differently, angled to prevent downdrafts that would blow smoke back into the living space. On very cold nights, they can be partially closed to reduce heat loss. The person who designed this system understood fluid dynamics in a way that wouldn't be formally documented by scientists until centuries later. The fire itself sits in a shallow pit in the center of the space. The pit is perhaps a foot deep, 2 feet across, and it's lined with flat river stones carefully selected for their ability to withstand repeated heating and cooling without cracking. These stones serve multiple purposes, each one important. They protect the dirt from becoming too loose and sandy from repeated burning, which would eventually create a depression that would be difficult to maintain. They retain heat, absorbing it during the day and radiating it long after the fire dies down at night. And they provide a stable platform for cooking vessels, a level surface that won't tip or spill. The fire is burning buffalo chips right now. Dried buffalo dung, the universal fuel of the plains. Each chip is perhaps the size of a dinner plate, maybe slightly larger, and they're stacked carefully, almost like a tiny log cabin, allowing air to flow through, allowing the fire to breathe. The chips burn with a steady, gentle heat. They don't flame up high. They don't crackle and spit like wood. They just glow and smolder, releasing warmth gradually, consistently, reliably. The smell of the fire is pleasant. Surprising, perhaps, to modern noses that expect dried dung to smell unpleasant. But it doesn't. Not like burning wood, certainly. Buffalo chips, when they burn, have an earthy, grassy smell. Because they're made from digested grass, really. Just grass that's been processed by the buffalo's complex four-stomach digestive system, compressed by passage through the intestines, dried by sun and wind and time. They smell like autumn fields, like dried hay, with just a hint of smoke. It's not unpleasant. It's actually rather comforting in a strange way. Around the perimeter of the space, the floor is raised slightly. This is the sleeping and sitting area, the platform where life happens. The floor has been built up with dried grass gathered in autumn and carefully stored packed down to create a firm surface and covered with buffalo robes. The robes are placed hair side down, creating a soft insulating surface that's comfortable to sit on, to lie on, to live on. You can see parfleches hanging from the poles near the peak. These are containers made from rawhide, painted with geometric designs in red and blue and yellow designs that have meaning, that tell stories, that identify the family that owns them. They hold pemmican dried berries, tools, clothing, medicine bundles, all the small essential items that a family needs to survive. Everything has its place. Everything is stored where it won't get damp from rising moisture, where it won't be in the way of daily activities, where it's easily accessible when needed, but out of reach of children and dogs who might disturb it. Near the back of the lodge opposite the door, there's a particularly thick pile of robes. This is the place of honor, the warmest spot in the entire structure. The spot farthest from drafts, closest to the fire, protected by the bodies of others. In this family, that's where Tall Elk's elderly mother sleeps, surrounded by grandchildren who keep her warm with their young bodies, their metabolism, their life force. You notice other details now as you stand there, letting the warmth seep into your bones, into your muscles, into places that have been cold for so long. There are tools hanging from poles, a knife in a beaded sheath, the beadwork precise and beautiful. A bag made from the stomach of a buffalo, used for carrying water, for cooking, for storage. Wooden bowls stacked neatly. Horn spoons carved from buffalo horn and polished smooth by years of use. Everything used daily is within reach. Nothing is stored far away. In winter, when going outside is dangerous, when every trip beyond the door flap means exposure to killing cold, convenience matters. Efficiency matters. Near the fire, there's a tripod made from green willow branches that won't burn easily, that can withstand the heat without catching fire. Suspended from it is another buffalo stomach, this one filled with water that's being kept warm by the fire. Not boiling, just warm. Ready for drinking, for washing, for cooking. Steam rises gently from its surface, adding moisture to the air, preventing the interior from becoming too dry. The walls themselves, the inner surface of the liner, are decorated in places with paintings. Geometric designs, mostly triangles and diamonds and zigzags that might seem abstract, but actually carry meaning, represent concepts, tell stories in a visual language that everyone in the community understands. There are also images of animals. Buffalo, of course. Horses brought by the Spanish and adopted enthusiastically. Deer and elk and bear. These aren't just decoration. They're records, stories, reminders of successful hunts, important events, moments that mattered enough to preserve in this permanent way. As you stand there, as you let the warmth continue its work, As you feel your body relaxing from the cold-induced tension, you become aware of sounds. The fire occasionally pops softly, a gentle, irregular sound. Every few minutes, a buffalo chip will crack as hot gases escape from its interior as the structure of the compressed plant material breaks down, releasing a small sigh of smoke. The sound is like someone snapping a twig very gently far away, soft, unobtrusive. A sound that becomes part of the background, part of the rhythm of this space. Outside, the wind continues its constant whisper against the hide walls, but it's a distant sound now, muffled, filtered through layers of hide and dead air. It's more felt than heard, a vibration, a presence. You're aware of it, conscious of it, but it can't reach you, can't touch you. It's outside and you're inside, and the boundary between them is solid and strong. Someone in the lodge shifts position. There's the rustle of hide against hide, a soft sound intimate human, the soft sound of breathing, regular, peaceful. This is a living space, a space where 8 people sleep and eat and work and exist together. A space that's been lived in, that carries the marks of occupation, the small signs of human presence. And it works, despite temperatures outside that would kill an exposed human in minutes, despite the constant wind and the endless cold. This space is warm, comfortable, safe. It's not luxury. It's not comfort in the modern sense of heated homes and soft furniture. But it's survivable. It's enough. And sometimes enough is everything. But not all tipis are equal. As you'll soon discover, some lodges are warmer than others. And the reasons why reveal truths about community and obligation and survival that go far deeper than engineering. Truths about what it means to be human, about how we organize ourselves, about how we decide who gets what in a world of scarcity. Look now across the camp through the smoke and haze of afternoon to the west side of the circle. There stands a tipi, perhaps twice the size of this one. The poles are longer, thicker, maybe 25 feet tall instead of 20. The hide covering is made from more hides, 15 or 20 hides instead of 10 or 12, creating a structure that's not just taller, but broader, 24 feet across instead of 12. That lodge belongs to Chief Running Wolf, and inside it, right now, while this family lodge maintains its comfortable 65 degrees, the temperature is approaching 75 degrees. Maybe even warmer, maybe approaching 80. The fire in Running Wolf's lodge burns differently. Not buffalo chips alone, though those are used, but also hardwood, split oak and walnut and other hardwoods brought from river valleys days away wood that burns hotter, cleaner, longer than any fuel available on the plains themselves. How does a chief have access to such fuel in a world where every resource is precious? Why is his lodge warmer while others are merely warm enough? What social structures, what obligations, what networks of reciprocity create this difference in warmth? The answer to those questions will reveal more about survival in winter than all the engineering details combined. But first, we need to understand what it takes to create warmth, what it takes to prepare for night, what it means to do the work of sleep. Let's step back outside now. The sun is lower in the sky. In an hour, maybe less, it will set. And across the camp, everyone is beginning the work that must be done before darkness falls. The work that keeps them alive. The sun is perhaps 2 hours above the western horizon now, though it's hard to tell exactly. In winter, the sun never climbs high in these latitudes. Even at noon at the peak of day, It barely clears the southern horizon, hanging low like a cold eye that offers light without warmth. And now, in late afternoon, it's beginning its descent, sliding toward that moment when it will disappear and leave the world to darkness and deeper cold. The light is already changing, taking on that particular quality that winter light has just before sunset. It becomes somehow both brighter and colder at the same time, if such a thing is possible. Objects cast long shadows across the snow shadows that are blue instead of grey-blue, like ice, like frozen water, like the colour cold would be if cold had a colour. The world looks sharp, hard, every edge defined, every line crisp. No softness, no blur, just clarity. Crystal clarity. And across the camp, everyone is moving. Because sunset in a winter camp is not a time for rest. It's not a time to relax, to slow down, to take things easy. It's a time for work. Urgent, methodical, essential work. The work that must be completed before darkness and deeper cold arrive. Work that cannot be postponed, cannot be delayed, cannot be left for tomorrow. Watch now as people emerge from tipis all across the circle. Women mostly, but also children and some elders. Men too, but men have different tasks, different responsibilities, different roles in this evening routine. The division of labor is ancient, refined over generations, embedded so deeply in the culture that no one questions it or thinks about it. Everyone simply knows their role. Everyone understands what needs to be done. From the lodge you just left, Red Willow Woman steps out into the cold. She's wrapped in a buffalo robe secured at the waist with a sash made from braided grass. The robe is worn hair side in against her body, so that the dead air trapped in the thick fur provides insulation, so that her body heat is held close rather than radiated away. The leather side faces out, blocking wind, shedding the fine particles of ice that hang suspended in the air on the coldest days. Her hands are covered with mittens made from buffalo hide, lined with rabbit fur, scraped and prepared with great care. Her feet are in moccasins, but not the simple summer moccasins made from soft hide. These are winter moccasins, constructed differently, engineered for warmth rather than just protection. They're made from buffalo hide with the hair left on worn hair side in. Over the moccasins, she's wrapped additional pieces of hide, creating a boot that extends almost to her knees, secured with leather thongs. Inside these wrappings, she's stuffed dried grass for additional insulation, creating yet another layer of trapped air. Even so, she knows she has perhaps 30 minutes before the cold begins to penetrate. 45 minutes at most if she keeps moving, if she doesn't stand still and let the cold seep through her defenses. After that, her fingers will start to stiffen, losing their dexterity, becoming clumsy and thick. Her toes will begin to ache, that deep bone ache that signals the first stage of frostbite. If she stays out an hour, she'll risk serious injury, permanent damage, loss of fingers or toes to freezing. So she moves with purpose, not rushing, because rushing wastes energy and causes mistakes, but not dawdling either, just steady, determined movement. The movement of someone who has done this task 1,000 times before and will do it 1,000 times again. Behind her, her daughters emerge from the tipi, one by one, pushing past the heavy door flap. The eldest is perhaps 12 winters old. Her name is Little Doe, a name that suits her because she's small for her age, quick and graceful like a young deer, but strong. Already she knows most of the women's work has learned through observation and practice since she was old enough to walk. In a few years, she'll be ready to marry, to run her own household, to build and maintain her own tipi. She'll be ready because she's been preparing for it her entire life. The middle daughter is maybe 8, quick and cheerful, always, laughing, always singing, always finding joy, even in the hardest work. The youngest is perhaps 5, still learning, still watching with wide eyes, still trying to understand why winter requires so much work, why so much effort must be expended just to survive another night. They're all dressed similarly to their mother. Robes, mittens, wrapped feet. They move together, a unit, a family, toward the edge of camp where the fuel is stored. The buffalo chip pile. Before you recoil, before you dismiss this as primitive or crude, or beneath the dignity of people who surely could have found better fuel, understand what buffalo chips represent in this world. Understand their value, their necessity. They are treasure, pure treasure. They are survival in physical form. They are the difference between warmth and death, between making it through another night and freezing in the darkness. Buffalo dung, when fresh, is useless as fuel. It's wet, dense, heavy. It won't burn. It will only smolder and smoke and create a horrible smell. But dried by sun and wind and time, transformed by the patient work of evaporation, it becomes something else entirely. The moisture evaporates leaves. The material becomes light porous, almost like compressed grass, which is essentially what it is. Grass that's been through the buffalo's digestive system, broken down by stomach acids and bacteria, processed by the animal's body, compressed by passage through the intestines, molded by the shape of the pile. Digested grass, really. Just grass in a different form. A dried buffalo chip is perhaps a foot across, 2 inches thick, curved slightly from the shape of the pile it was dropped in. It weighs almost nothing. Feels almost like a piece of dried bread, crispy and light. You can break it with your hands if you're not careful, crumble it into powder, and it burns. It burns hot, surprisingly hot. Not as hot as hardwood, not as hot as oak or walnut, or the dense woods that grow in forests far from here, but hotter than many people expect. Much hotter than grass would burn if you tried to burn grass directly. The process of digestion somehow concentrates. The burnable material increases the energy density. It burns clean with little smoke, little smell. Just that earthy, grassy scent we mentioned before. And most importantly, most crucially, it burns slowly, very slowly. A single chip properly placed in a fire, properly positioned to allow airflow but not too much, can smolder for an hour or more, releasing steady heat without producing much flame. Just glowing, just radiating warmth. This slow, steady burn is perfect for maintaining temperature overnight. Perfect for the long winter nights when the fire must continue burning for 12, 14, sometimes 16 hours between evening and morning. A fire built from buffalo chips can be banked in the evening, arranged just so, and will still have live coals in the morning, ready to be coaxed back to flame with dried grass and breath. The women and children of Red Willow Woman's family reach the fuel pile. It's enormous. Hundreds of chips, thousands stacked carefully to shed snow and rain, arranged to allow air circulation so the chips don't absorb moisture from the ground. This pile represents weeks of work, months of work. All summer and autumn, whenever the family moved camp, whenever they came across areas where buffalo had grazed, wherever the great herds had passed, the women and children gathered chips. It's work that's never mentioned in the dramatic histories in the tales of buffalo hunts and battles and vision quests. But it's essential work, survival work. Without this fuel pile, without these hundreds of pounds of dried dung, the family would freeze. Little Doe has a basket woven from willow branches, supple green branches bent and woven, while fresh, then allowed to dry in that shape, creating a container that's both strong and flexible. She begins selecting chips carefully, not just grabbing any chip, but choosing, evaluating. Not the oldest ones, which have been in the pile for years and crumble into powder when touched, useless for burning. Not the newest ones, which might still have moisture in their centers, which might smoke rather than burn clean. She chooses chips that are fully dried, but still intact, chips that will burn long, and hot chips that represent the perfect balance of age and preservation. She places them gently in her basket, building a stack fitting them together like puzzle pieces. There's an art to this, a skill that looks simple, but isn't. The chips must be arranged so they won't break during transport, so they won't crumble from the weight of chips stacked above them. Her younger sisters do the same, each with their own basket. The middle daughter works quickly, efficiently, humming to herself as she works. The youngest struggles a bit. Her basket is smaller, designed for her size, but even so, it's almost too much for her to carry when full. She chooses her chips with great care, as if the fate of the family depends on her selections. In a way, it does. Red Willow Woman supervises occasionally picking up a chip herself, examining it, feeling its weight, checking for moisture or damage, either adding it to a basket or tossing it back on the pile. She knows from experience that goes back to her own childhood, from watching her mother and her grandmother, from years of winter survival, which chips will burn best, which ones will last longest, which ones will produce the most heat with the least smoke, which ones are worth carrying back to the lodge, and which ones should be left for emergencies. This knowledge was taught to her by her mother, who learned it from her mother, who learned it from her mother. Back and back through generations, an unbroken line of knowledge about fuel selection, fire management, heat retention, survival. It's not written down anywhere. There are no books about it, no manuals, no instructional texts. But it's preserved with perfect accuracy through demonstration and practice and memory, through showing and watching and doing, until the knowledge becomes instinctive, becomes part of who you are. The baskets fill slowly. Each family will need perhaps 20 pounds of chips for tonight. More if the temperature drops especially low, if the wind picks up, if a storm moves in. Less if they're conserving fuel, rationing it carefully through a long winter when the pile diminishes and must last until spring. As the baskets fill, as the work continues, you become aware of sounds. The soft crunch of moccasins on packed snow, a sound like walking on cold sand. The occasional crack of a chip breaking, snapping like a dry twig. The breathing of the workers visible as clouds of vapor that freeze almost instantly, turning to tiny ice crystals that fall to the snow that accumulate over winter into a thin layer of frost around the fuel pile. And underneath it all, always underneath everything, the constant whisper of wind. Always the wind. Red Willow, woman's eldest daughter, Little Doe, fills her basket first. She's the strongest, the most experienced, the most efficient at this task. Her basket is heavy now, perhaps 25 pounds. She lifts it carefully, testing the weight, balancing it on her hip, in the way women have carried loads since the beginning of time. She begins walking back toward the family lodge, moving carefully over the packed snow, placing each step precisely, not rushing, not risking a fall. Her younger sisters follow, each carrying their smaller loads. They walk in a line, single file, following in Little Doe's footsteps, taking advantage of the path she's breaking. Red Willow Woman makes one final selection, choosing several particularly large chips that will burn for hours. Chips that will see the family through the coldest part of night. Then she too turns back toward home. As she walks, she passes other women doing the same work. Some are heading toward the chip pile, empty baskets in hand. Some are returning with full baskets balanced on hips or carried on backs. There are perhaps 30 women out right now, all moving with the same purpose, all racing against the setting sun, all working to ensure their families survive another night. No one speaks much. This is work that requires concentration, that benefits from silence. Speaking means breathing more cold air, means expending energy on something other than the task at hand. And there's no need for speech. Everyone knows what they're doing. Everyone understands the rhythm, the routine. But there are small gestures of acknowledgement. A nod as two women pass each other. A slight smile, brief, barely there. The recognition of shared labor, shared burden, shared understanding that this is how life is, has always been, will always be, until the world changes in ways no one can yet imagine. Near the family tipi, Red Willow Woman's husband, Tall Elk, is engaged in different work. He's dragging sections of deadwood from a pile near the lodge wood that's been stored here since autumn, protected from snow by a covering of hides. This wood is precious in a different way than buffalo chips. It's harder to come by, found only near the rare creek beds where trees manage to grow, where conditions are just right for the stunted cottonwoods and willows to survive. It was gathered in autumn before the first snow hauled back to camp on a travois pulled by dogs. The strong dogs, the ones bred and trained for this work, capable of pulling heavy loads for miles. The wood has been dried split to manageable sizes, using stone tools and fire and patient work. Each piece is perhaps 2 feet long, as thick as a man's arm. This is kindling wood, starter wood, not for overnight burning. This is wood for starting the evening fire, for bringing water to a boil quickly, for cooking food that needs higher heat than buffalo chips alone can provide. Tall Elk selects several pieces, carefully running his hands over them, checking for moisture, for soundness, for quality. He stacks them near the entrance of the tipi, where they can be reached without fully leaving shelter, where they're protected from wind and snow. He's methodical, precise. Every piece has a purpose. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is taken for granted. As he works, one of his dogs comes and sits near him. It's a large dog, perhaps 50 pounds, with a thick coat of fur that stands out from its body, creating its own layer of insulation. The dog watches Tall Elk work, waiting patiently, knowing that soon it will be allowed inside for the night, that it will sleep by the fire and share the family's warmth. In return, it provides body heat, yes, but also security. It guards the camp alerts to danger, helps pull loads when the family moves. The relationship is transactional, yes, but also deeper than that. There's affection here, partnership, mutual respect. Inside the tipi, Red Willow Woman's second eldest daughter has been tending to a task that will make tonight survivable, that will transform merely endurable warmth to something closer to comfort. She's heating stones. These are not small pebbles, not rocks you'd pick up by the side of the trail. These are river rocks, each one the size of a man's head, smooth and rounded by water and time, by years or decades of being tumbled by spring floods, of being ground against other rocks until all sharp edges are gone. They were selected, very carefully tested, to ensure they won't explode, when heated won't shatter violently, when exposed to extreme temperature changes. Some stones especially, stones with layers or cracks or different minerals compressed together, will do exactly that, will burst like bombs when heated, sending sharp fragments flying. These stones are solid, uniform safe. They've been tested over the course of many winters and proved themselves reliable. There are 6 stones arranged around the fire pit, positioned carefully where the heat is most intense. They've been heating for the past hour, absorbing energy, storing it in their molecular structure, their atoms vibrating faster and faster as the temperature increases. By now, they're too hot to touch, far too hot. If you were to spit on one, the spit would dance and sizzle and evaporate. In seconds would bounce across the surface like mercury on glass. The girl, working with the intense concentration of someone performing a dangerous task, uses wooden tongs made from green willow branches that won't burn easily, that can withstand high heat without catching fire. She wraps each stone in multiple layers of hide. Old hide, worn soft and thin from years of use, but still serviceable, still strong enough for this purpose. She wraps each stone completely carefully, creating a bundle that won't burn the hides it will rest against, that will radiate heat gently rather than scorching whatever it touches. Then, using a forked stick and the tongs together, moving slowly, carefully, she carries each wrapped stone to the sleeping platform at the back of the tipi. She places them under the buffalo robes that will cover the family tonight, spacing them out according to a plan she's learned from watching her mother. One stone near where the grandmother will sleep, because the old woman feels the cold more acutely, needs more warmth to stay comfortable. 2 stones where the parents will lie positioned to warm 2 bodies rather than 1. 3 smaller stones, slightly cooler stones for the children, because young bodies generate more heat, naturally need less assistance from external sources. These stones are portable furnaces, mobile heat sources, personal warming systems. They will radiate warmth for 6 hours, maybe 8 if they're large enough, if they're hot enough, if they're wrapped properly. Long enough to get through the coldest part of the night, those hours just before dawn, when the fire burns lowest and the outside temperature drops to its minimum, when the world seems to give up trying, when the cold presses hardest against the walls of every shelter. This technology is ancient, simple, elegant, and it works better than anything modern humans would invent until electric blankets came along in the 20th century. Better in some ways, because these stones provide a gentle, even heat that doesn't dry out. The air doesn't create hot spots that might burn skin, doesn't require any power source beyond the fire that's already burning, doesn't fail or break or need replacement parts. Red Willow Woman returns to the lodge with her basket of buffalo chips. Her daughters are already inside their smaller baskets, emptied the chips they gathered, added to the growing pile near the fire pit. The chips are being stacked, carefully arranged for easy access during the night, organized by size, so the right chips can be found by feel in darkness. She adds her chips to the pile, placing the larger ones on the bottom, the smaller ones on top. Then she turns her attention to the evening meal. Food preparation in winter is its own challenge, its own specialized knowledge. Food must provide not just nutrition, but crucial calories must deliver energy in a form the body can use to maintain temperature to fuel the constant work of survival. The human body, maintaining temperature in extreme cold, burns energy at an astonishing rate, at a rate that seems almost impossible until you understand the physics of heat loss, until you calculate how many calories must be burned just to replace the warmth that radiates away into the frozen air. A man doing heavy work in winter, hunting or hauling or building, might need 4,000 calories a day just to maintain his weight, just to keep his body functioning. A woman smaller but still working constantly needs 3,000. Children, depending on size and age, need perhaps 2,000. These are enormous numbers. Numbers that would be hard to meet even in summer with fresh meat and vegetables readily available. In winter, when stored food must last for months, when nothing is fresh, when every calorie must come from preserved stores meeting. These requirements seems almost impossible, and yet it's done, has been done for thousands of years. Through careful preparation, through knowledge accumulated over countless generations, through a food technology so sophisticated that modern nutritionists are only beginning to understand its genius. The answer, the solution developed over centuries of trial and error, is pemmican. Red willow woman moves to where the parfleches hang from the poles, suspended in the upper reaches, where rising heat keeps them from freezing, but where dogs and young children can't easily reach them. She selects one, brings it down carefully, opens it with practiced movements. Inside, wrapped in more hide to protect it from moisture and vermin, and the gnawing of mice that somehow always find their way into storage, are blocks of concentrated nutrition. Pemmican. To understand pemmican is to understand survival in winter, to understand how people lived in conditions that would kill most modern humans. It's not just dried meat, though that's part of it, an important part. The process of making it is labor-intensive, time-consuming, requires perfect execution at every stage. Any mistake, any deviation from the precise technique refined over generations results in food that spoils, that becomes rancid, that can make you sick or even kill you. It begins with buffalo meat killed in autumn when the animals are fat from summer grazing, when they've built up reserves, when their bodies are at peak condition. The best meat comes from animals killed in September or October, just as the weather turns cold, but before the deep freeze of winter sets in. The meat is sliced thin, cut across the grain into strips perhaps 1/4 inch thick, each strip perhaps a foot long. These strips are hung on racks made from wooden poles, lashed together, elevated to keep them away from dogs and scavengers. But they can't dry too fast or too slow. Too fast, and the outside will form a hard crust, while the inside remains moist, creating conditions where bacteria can grow despite the dry exterior, leading to spoilage from within. Too slow, and bacteria will establish themselves on the surface. Before the meat dries, will begin breaking down the tissue, creating toxins that can cause serious illness. The right speed is achieved by controlling exposure to sun and wind, by understanding the weather, by knowing when conditions are perfect. In autumn, when the air is cool but not freezing, when the sun still has some strength but isn't too intense, when there's a steady breeze but not harsh wind. The conditions are ideal. The meat dries over several days, 4 or 5 days, usually turning progressively darker, harder, drier. When it's fully dried, it's brittle, almost like wood. You can snap it like a twig. All moisture is gone, or nearly all. The meat will keep for years. In this state will resist spoilage because there's no water for bacteria to use. But dried meat alone is not enough. It's too lean. The fat has been trimmed away because fat doesn't dry, well goes rancid quickly. And the human body in winter needs fat, desperately needs it. Needs the dense calories that only fat can provide, the 9 calories per gram compared to 4 calories per gram for protein or carbohydrates. Fat is what keeps you warm, what gives your body the fuel it needs to generate heat. So the dried meat is just the first step, just the foundation. The real work comes next. The dried strips are placed on a buffalo hide spread on the ground, a hide that's been thoroughly cleaned and dried. Then women sit around this hide with stone hammers, heavy round stones, hafted to wooden handles, and they pound. They pound the dried meat over and over, striking it repeatedly, breaking it down. This is hard work, repetitive work that makes your shoulders ache and your hands cramp. But it's essential work. They pound until the meat breaks down into a coarse powder, almost like sawdust, fibrous and dry. This takes hours, many hours. Women sit together doing this work, talking or singing, or simply working in companionable silence. The rhythm of the hammers creating a pattern, a beat almost like drums. While the meat is being pounded, fat is being rendered in a different part of the lodge. Buffalo fat, the precious fat from around the organs and beneath the hide, is cut into small pieces and heated gently in a vessel over the fire. Not too hot, because fat that's overheated will develop off flavors, will smoke and spit. Just warm enough to melt. The fat liquefies, turns from solid white chunks into golden liquid that looks almost like honey. Any impurities, any bits of meat or membrane or blood vessels that remained attached to the fat are carefully skimmed away using horn spoons. The result, after careful work, is pure, clean fat, golden, clear, with almost no smell. This fat is precious beyond measure, represents survival in its most concentrated form. This rendered fat is mixed with the pounded meat powder while the fat is still warm and liquid. Roughly equal proportions by weight, though the exact ratio varies depending on the meat, the fat quality, the preferences of the family. Sometimes dried berries are added at this stage. Choke cherries primarily, which grow wild on the plains in certain areas, which provide a tart flavor and important vitamins, particularly vitamin C, which helps prevent scurvy during the long winter. Sometimes dried prairie turnips are added roots that have been sliced thin and dried, providing carbohydrates and minerals that balance the heavy protein and fat. The mixture is stirred while the fat is still warm and liquid stirred until every particle of meat powder is coated, until the fat has penetrated throughout, until the mixture becomes a dense paste. This paste is then packed tightly into rawhide bags. The parfleche is pushed down hard to eliminate air pockets, compressed until no space remains. The rawhide itself acts as a vapor barrier, keeping moisture out, keeping the pemmican from absorbing humidity from the air. The bags are sewn shut with sinew thread, and then, remarkably, the pemmican is done. Complete, finished. It will keep for years, decades if stored properly in a cool, dry place. There are stories, historical accounts of pemmican being recovered from abandoned camps after 20 years, still perfectly edible, still nutritious, still capable of sustaining life. 1 pound of pemmican contains roughly 3,500 calories. Think about that. A single pound. A block small enough to fit in your hand contains enough energy to sustain an adult for an entire day of hard work in cold conditions. And it's dense, compact, easy to transport. A family can carry enough pemmican to survive for months, carrying it on their backs or on a travois, moving with the buffalo herds following the seasons. Red Willow Woman cuts off a portion of pemmican with a knife made from flaked stone. The knife is sharper than many steel knives because stone, when properly worked, can be honed to an edge only a few molecules wide. The edge chips easily, yes. Requires frequent retouching, but it cuts beautifully. She places some of the pemmican directly into wooden bowls, portioning it out. This will be eaten as is chewed slowly, the fat melting on the tongue, the meat fibers breaking down, gradually releasing flavor, providing sustained energy that will last for hours. Other pieces she drops into a container suspended over the fire, a cooking vessel. This is another buffalo stomach, the paunch tough and waterproof, when properly prepared, cleaned and scraped, and turned inside out. It's filled with water that's been heating for the past hour, water that's now quite warm, approaching boiling temperature. She adds more heated stones from the fire pit, picking them up with wooden tongs, dropping them directly into the water. They hit with a hiss and a sudden cloud of steam. The water temperature rises quickly, dramatically. Within minutes, it's boiling vigorously, bubbles rising to the surface and bursting. Into this boiling water, she adds the pemmican. It begins to soften immediately, the fat melting, releasing into the water, the meat fibers loosening, breaking apart. The mixture becomes a rich, nutritious stew, a soup that's more fat than water, that's thick and filling and warming. The smell fills the tipi, fatty, meaty, rich, with undertones of berries and smoke and something earthy, something primal, something that speaks to the deepest parts of human hunger. She adds other ingredients. Dried roots that were excavated in autumn before the ground froze solid, before digging became impossible. These roots, probably wild turnips or karma's bulbs or other plants that store energy underground, were placed in pits dug below the frost line, lined carefully with bark to keep them separated from the soil, to prevent them from absorbing minerals or flavors from the earth. In the pit, covered with more bark and then with soil, they froze solid and remained frozen, preserved as perfectly as if they'd been in a modern freezer, protected from decay by the simple physics of temperature. This morning, Tall Elk dug up a small cache of these roots, perhaps 5 or 6 pounds, enough for several meals. It required work chipping through the frozen ground, locating the pit that was marked only by a pile of stones, extracting the roots without damaging them. Now added to the stew, they provide carbohydrates and a slightly sweet flavor that balances the richness of the fat that makes the meal more complex, more satisfying. The stew simmers. The smell intensifies, becomes almost overwhelming in the small space. Outside, the sun is perhaps half an hour from setting. The light is fading, taking on that deep blue quality that happens just before sunset in winter, that color between day and night, between light and darkness. The temperature is dropping moment by moment, degree by degree. All across the camp, similar scenes are playing out. Women preparing food, the evening meal that will provide the calories needed to survive the night. Men finishing final tasks outside, securing things that might blow away, checking on animals, making last adjustments to smoke flaps and door covers. Children being called in from play from the last few minutes of outdoor activity before the dangers of darkness and deeper cold arrive. Dogs settling near entrances, waiting patiently to be allowed inside for the night, knowing they'll soon share the warmth of the lodges. The urgency is increasing. Everyone can feel it. The temperature is dropping noticeably now. Already it's colder than it was an hour ago, significantly colder. By the time the sun actually sets, disappears below the western horizon, it will be 40 below zero. An hour after sunset, perhaps 45 below. 2 hours after sunset, 50 below. This is the pattern of winter nights on the plains. This is the reality against which all survival efforts are measured. Red willow. Woman knows this, in her bones knows it in a way that goes deeper than thought, deeper than consciousness. She moves faster now, not rushing, but not dawdling, not wasting movements, not pausing unnecessarily. She checks the water supply, ensures there's enough for drinking tonight and tomorrow morning, because fetching water after dark means exposure to killing cold. She checks the parfleches, making sure everything is secure, making sure nothing is in a position where it might freeze, where the cold might damage it. She checks the entrance flap, making sure it's properly secured, that the overlap is correct, that the ties are tight, that there are no gaps where cold air might stream in, might create drafts that would rob heat from the interior. She checks. Her children goes to each one, runs her hands over their clothing, makes sure they're properly dressed for sleeping. In winter, you don't remove all your clothes to sleep. That would be dangerous, potentially fatal. You loosen them slightly, unfasten tight bindings to allow better circulation, but you keep layers on. The buffalo robes provide warmth, yes, substantial warmth, but the cold is always there, always waiting for weakness, always ready to exploit any gap in your defenses. Tall elk enters, bringing the last of the wood inside the pieces he selected for starting the evening fire, for maintaining enough heat through the meal. He secures the entrance flap behind him, adjusting it carefully with practiced movements, ensuring a good seal, ensuring that the heavy leather falls properly into place, that no gaps remain. He adds wood to the fire, building it up slightly for the evening meal, for the time when the family will gather and eat and share warmth and presence and life. The fire responds, flames growing slightly higher, light increasing, shadows dancing more actively on the walls. The temperature in the lodge rises a few degrees, enough to be noticed, enough to push back against the encroaching cold. The family gathers around the fire, 8 people in a circle. The grandmother positioned in the warmest spot at the back, supported by folded robes, surrounded by grandchildren who orbit her like small planets around a sun. Tall elk and red willow woman sitting together close enough that their shoulders touch, that they share body heat without thinking about it. The 4 children ranging from 12 years to 5, sitting cross-legged or kneeling, waiting patiently for food for the meal that will sustain them through the night. They sit on buffalo robes on the raised platform that encircles the fire. Close enough to share body heat, close enough that the fire's warmth reaches all of them equally. This closeness is not optional, not a choice. It's survival. Heat generation and heat conservation both require proximity, require contact, require the physical presence of others. Red willow woman serves the stew, ladling it carefully into wooden bowls, using the horn spoon that's been smoothed by years of use that fits her hand perfectly. Each family member receives their portion carefully calculated. The grandmother gets slightly more because she's old and thin, and her body struggles to maintain temperature, needs extra calories. The eldest daughter, Little Doe, gets slightly more because she's growing rapidly, her body demanding energy for development. The youngest gets slightly less because her small body requires less absolute fuel, though proportionally she needs as much or more than the adults. The bowls are passed hand to hand, the heat from the stew warming fingers, warming palms. Everyone waits until all are served. Then together they begin to eat. Slowly. Not from leisure, but from necessity. Hot food must be consumed carefully to avoid burning the mouth, the tongue, the throat. But also slowly, because eating slowly allows the warmth of the food to spread through the body, allows the calories to begin their work of heat generation, allows the system to register satiety before overeating. They eat in near silence. Conversation happens, quiet exchanges, small observations. But mostly, there's just the sounds of eating. Wooden spoons against wooden bowls, soft swallowing, contented breathing. This is not a social meal in the modern sense. This is refueling. This is preparation for survival. This is work, even though it feels like rest. When everyone has finished, when the bowls are empty, or nearly so, Red Willow Woman collects them. Any remaining stew is left in the container, allowed to cool slightly, but kept near the fire where it won't freeze solid, where it will remain accessible. This is important. Someone might wake hungry in the night, might need additional calories, might require the warmth of hot food to get back to sleep. Having food available, having it ready, can mean the difference between a restful night and one of discomfort or danger. The bowls are cleaned by the children, a task they perform without being told, because it's their responsibility, because they've done it every night of their lives. They take the bowls outside, briefly fill them with clean snow, use the snow to scour away food residue. Then they bring them back inside and dry them with soft hide with pieces of well-worn leather kept specifically for this purpose. The spoons are rinsed the same way, then hung back on their hooks, ready for morning, ready for tomorrow's meals. Everything is put away. Everything is organized. Everything is ready for the night and for the following day. This organization is not optional. In winter, when going outside to retrieve a forgotten item means exposure to danger, when darkness makes finding things difficult, when frozen fingers struggle with tasks that would be simple in other seasons, preparation matters. Order matters. Knowing where everything is, being able to find what you need by touch alone, can be the difference between comfort and suffering. Now comes the final preparation. The most important task of the evening. The fire must be arranged for the night. Red Willow Woman takes control of this task. It's crucial work that requires experience, requires judgment, requires an understanding of fire that goes beyond knowledge into instinct. Too much fire and fuel will be wasted, burned through too quickly, leaving them with no easy way to rekindle in the morning when fingers are stiff and breath freezes and even simple tasks become difficult. Too little fire, and the lodge will become dangerously cold before dawn will drop below the temperature needed for comfortable sleep, will allow the cold to penetrate and threaten. She's learned from her mother and from her own years of experience, from countless winters, from trial and error and careful observation, exactly how to build a fire that will last, exactly how to arrange fuel so it burns at precisely the right rate. It's not something that can be easily explained or taught through words. It's something that must be learned through doing, through watching the fire through the night, through waking to check it, through adjusting and modifying and refining until the knowledge becomes part of you. She starts by removing any large pieces of wood that are still burning actively, that are producing flame rather than just glowing. Those are set aside, placed on the stones surrounding the fire pit to be used for rekindling in the morning if needed, if the coals have died too much, if starting the morning fire proves difficult. Then she begins arranging the buffalo chips. This is an art, a precise art that looks simple but requires deep understanding. The largest chips go on the bottom, arranged in a rough ring around the edges of the fire pit, creating a foundation. On top of these, she places medium-sized chips, arranging them to allow some airflow, but not too much, creating channels for oxygen to reach the burning material, but not so much flow that the fire burns too quickly. On top of everything, she places a few small chips and some dried grass material that will burn easily if the fire needs to be rebuilt, that will catch from the smallest ember. The structure, when complete, looks almost like a small building, like a tiny architectural model. There are channels for air to enter from below, rising through the structure. There are spaces for gases to escape, for the smoke to rise and exit. The entire arrangement is designed to burn slowly, steadily, converting fuel into heat at a rate that will last exactly through the night, that will still have live coals in the morning when someone, probably little Doe, will wake before dawn and rebuild the fire for the day. As she works, Tall Elk checks the smoke flaps one final time. This is his responsibility, his contribution to the evening preparation. He uses a pole kept just inside the entrance, reaching up through the space between the liner and the outer wall, maneuvering the pole through the opening, adjusting the flaps slightly by pushing on the control poles that extend from the flaps to ground level outside. He makes tiny adjustments, small modifications based on wind direction, temperature, his sense of what the night will require. Too open and the draft will be too strong, pulling heat out too quickly, burning fuel too fast, wasting the precious chips that must last until morning. Too closed and smoke will accumulate. Inside will make the air unbreathable, will drive people out into the deadly cold or suffocate them in their sleep. He finds the perfect balance, the position that he's learned through countless winters, through endless nights of adjustment and observation. A position that will keep the smoke moving out while preserving heat inside, that will maintain that delicate equilibrium that makes survival possible. The fire begins to settle into its overnight rhythm. The flames die down gradually, peacefully. What remains is a steady glow, a bed of coals that radiates heat without flame, without the flickering light that would keep people awake. With occasional small flames flickering up as gases escape from heating buffalo chips, brief moments of light that illuminate faces that cast brief shadows, then disappear back into the glow. The temperature in the lodge is perhaps 70 degrees now. Comfortable. Genuinely comfortable. Warm enough that you don't need to wear all your layers. Warm enough that children can move around without discomfort. Warm enough that the grandmother's old bones don't ache quite so much. But everyone knows this warmth is temporary, provisional, contingent. It exists only because of the work that's been done, the fuel that's been gathered over months, the stones that have been heated for hours. the food that's been prepared through careful labor-intensive processes, the fire that's been carefully arranged by someone who knows exactly what she's doing, the entrance flap that's been properly secured, the smoke flaps that have been precisely adjusted. And it exists because of knowledge. Knowledge of how to seal a tipi, how to manage airflow, how to select fuel, how to bank a fire, how to prepare food, how to heat stones, how to maintain all the systems that keep humans alive in conditions that should kill them. Knowledge that was earned over centuries, paid for with cold nights and failed experiments, and people who didn't survive, whose deaths taught lessons that were remembered and incorporated into the accumulated wisdom of survival. This knowledge is survival. It's life itself, encoded not in writing, but in actions, in arranged materials, in careful attention to detail, in the repetition of tasks until they become automatic, until they become who you are. The family begins to settle into their sleeping places. The children lie down first, nestled together in the middle of the sleeping platform, the youngest in the very center, where she'll be warmest, their older siblings on either side, forming a protective barrier, their bodies creating a microclimate of warmth. The grandmother lies at the back in the warmest spot in the place of honor, where the heated stones beneath the robes are releasing their precious warmth, where she's protected from drafts, where her grandchildren's bodies will keep her warm through the night. Tall elk and red willow woman take positions on either side of the sleeping arrangement, forming a protective outer barrier, their bodies shielding the children from any cold air that might seep in, keeping the family warm through their own body heat, through their presence, through their watchfulness that continues even in sleep. Over them, all buffalo robes are carefully arranged, not carelessly thrown, not just piled on, but arranged with thought, with purpose. The first layer goes on with the hair side down against bodies, against skin and clothing, so the soft, dense fur trap's warm air next to them creates that crucial layer of dead air that's the key to all insulation. The second layer goes on with the hair side up, creating dead air spaces between the layers, creating multiple barriers against heat loss. The robes are heavy, substantially heavy. A single buffalo robe might weigh 20 pounds or more. A family sleeping under 3 or 4 robes is sleeping under perhaps 80, 90, maybe 100 pounds of fur and leather. That weight is not uncomfortable. It's comforting, securing. It holds in heat, yes, but it also creates pressure that makes the body feel safe, makes you feel held, protected, cared for. It's similar to what modern therapy uses weighted blankets for that deep pressure that calms the nervous system, that signals safety. Red Willow Woman makes a final check before settling down herself. She looks at each family member, ensuring everyone is settled, everyone is warm, everyone is positioned correctly. She checks the fire one more time, just a glance, confirming that it's burning correctly, that the arrangement is right. She checks the entrance, ensuring it's sealed. She listens to the smoke, to the sound of draft pulling it out through the smoke hole, confirming that the ventilation is working properly. Everything is in order. Everything is as it should be. Everything that can be done has been done. She lies down between her children, feeling their warmth against her sides, feeling the warmth of the stones beneath the robes, feeling the gentle heat radiating from the fire, feeling the presence of her husband on the other side of the sleeping arrangement, feeling the safety of family, of community, of shared survival. Outside, the sun has set. Darkness has fallen. The temperature is plummeting moment by moment. The wind continues its endless whisper, that constant presence that never stops, never rests. But inside there is warmth, there is safety, there is family, there is everything that matters. And soon, very soon, there will be sleep. Let yourself drift now. You're lying under buffalo robes. The weight is substantial, reassuring. The fur traps your body heat, creating a personal atmosphere of warmth. Beneath you, the heated stones radiate gentle warmth. Not hot anymore. They've been giving for an hour, but still present, still caring. The fire has burned down to a gentle glow. Occasionally, a small flame flickers up as gas escapes from a buffalo chip. The sound is like someone snapping a twig very gently far away. Outside, the wind continues, but it sounds different now from inside. Distant, muffled, filtered through layers of hide and dead air. You're aware of it, but it can't reach you. Your body releases tension in stages. Surface muscles, then deeper muscles that hold you upright during the day. Then something even deeper that chronic tension modern life creates. Here now, in this moment, you're safe. Actually safe. The warmth from the stones is sublime. Your hip, your shoulder, your thigh rest against this warmth through layers, and they feel held, supported, cared for. Outside, the temperature continues to drop. 45 below, 50 below. At this temperature, exposed skin freezes in under a minute. This is cold that kills. But inside the tipi, the temperature remains steady. 60 degrees, perhaps 65. The insulation is working. The fire is working. The stones are working. The whole system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Keep people alive. Keep you alive. Through the night, through the cold, through the darkness. Let yourself sleep now. Really sleep. You're safe here. Protected by knowledge that spans generations, surrounded by family, part of something larger than yourself. Sleep, let me tell you a story that stretches back through time, back beyond memory, back beyond written records, back beyond the moment when the first Europeans set foot on these plains and tried to write down what they saw, tried to understand what they were witnessing. Back to when the only way to preserve knowledge was to live it, to practice it, to teach it to your children through demonstration and repetition and careful, patient showing. Back to when memory was all there was, and memory had to be enough. The great plains of North America, grasslands so vast they make the ocean seem small, seem containable. Stretching from what would someday be called Canada, from the far north, where the trees give out, and tundra begins down to what would someday be called Texas, where the grass gradually yields to desert. From the Rocky Mountains in the west, those great stone walls rising suddenly from flatness to the great river valleys in the east, where the Mississippi and its tributaries cut through the landscape, these plains were not always as we think of them now. They changed with time, changed with climate, changed with the animals that grazed them and the people who hunted those animals, who shaped the landscape with fire and movement and the weight of 10,000 years of habitation. 12,000 years ago, maybe more, these plains were different. The climate was different, colder in some periods, wetter in some places, drier in others. The seasons swung more wildly extremes of temperature and precipitation that would seem impossible now. Giant animals walked here. Megafauna that would seem fantastical if we hadn't found their bones, hadn't confirmed their existence through fossil evidence. Mammoths with tusks that curved like scythes. ground sloths the size of modern elephants, ancient camels and horses different from anything alive today, saber-toothed cats that hunted in the tall grass. A world that seems like fantasy, but was real, was actual, was the daily reality for the first humans who walked these plains. Long before the buffalo darkened these plains, giants walked here. But the land changed, the climate shifted, and the people adapted. They watched the giants fade into memory, replaced by the herds that would sustain them for millennia. The buffalo and humans, the first humans. Walking across a land that had never known human footsteps, had never been shaped by human hands, had existed in a state that was truly wild, truly untouched, hunting with stone-tipped spears, creating the first camps, the first shelters, the first attempts to make this landscape, this environment, into something livable. We don't know exactly when the tipi was invented. We can't point to a year or even a century. The materials don't preserve. Hide rots quickly. In most conditions, returns to the soil feeds, bacteria and fungi and insects, until nothing remains. Poles decay, full are scattered by wind and weather. What remains, what we can find, what archaeology can recover, are only the stone tools used to scrape hides, the bone needles used to sew them. The fire pits where families gathered for warmth, marked by ash and charcoal and heat-altered stones. But we can trace the idea, the concept, the slow evolution of portable shelter from simple beginnings to the sophisticated design we've been exploring. The tipis didn't appear overnight. They were born from 10,000 years of trial and error. Ancestors experimented with bent saplings and lean-tos, learning hard lessons from the wind and snow. Slowly, painfully, generation after generation, they refined the design until they arrived at the only shape that could master the wind, the cone. Think about what that means. 10,000 years, 400 generations, 400 times someone was born, grew up, learned from their parents, made small improvements, taught their children, and died. 400 cycles of life and death and learning. 400 opportunities for innovation, for discovering what worked and what didn't. Someone, somewhere, discovered that a tripod of poles, 3 poles lashed together at the top and spread at the bottom, was more stable than trying to lean poles against something external. This seems obvious now, but it wasn't then. It was a breakthrough, a moment of insight that changed everything. Someone discovered that pulling the hides tight and securing them properly, really securing them, rather than just draping them, made the structure much more wind-resistant. Made it able to withstand 50-mile-per-hour winds without collapsing, without tearing, without failing. Someone discovered that leaving a hole at the top allowed smoke to escape, while heat remained trapped below, creating a chimney effect that made indoor fires practical, that transformed the tipi from just a windbreak into a true dwelling. Each discovery was small, each one barely noticeable in a single lifetime. You wouldn't see the change happen. You'd live your whole life and the tipis would look basically the same. But accumulated over hundreds of generations, over thousands of years of tiny adjustments and refinements, these small discoveries built into something remarkable, into something that approaches perfection within its constraints. The tipi, in its classic form, the form we recognize today, probably emerged perhaps 3,000 years ago. Maybe less, maybe more. We can't be certain. But by the time European explorers first encountered the Plains tribes, when those first confused and amazed Spanish soldiers saw these structures for the first time and tried to describe them in letters home to people who had never seen anything like them, the tipi had reached a kind of perfection, a final form that wouldn't be significantly improved upon because it couldn't be. Every detail had been refined to the point where any change would make it worse rather than better. Every modification that could be imagined had been tried, tested, kept if it worked, discarded if it didn't. The tribes that lived on these plains, Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Comanche, Kiowa, Blackfeet, Crow, Pawnee, many others, each with their own language, their own customs, their own names for themselves, that often meant simply the people, because from their perspective, they were the only people that truly mattered, the only ones living correctly, the only ones who understood how life should be lived. Each tribe had variations on the basic tipi design. Each had small innovations unique to their environment and specific needs. From the Lakota in the north to the Comanche in the south, every tribe added their own genius to the design. The Blackfeet doubled their walls against the bitter cold of the far north. The Cheyenne mastered the aerodynamics of smoke flaps, understanding how to adjust them for maximum efficiency in different wind conditions. The Crow developed techniques for waterproofing that made their tipis particularly effective in wet weather. But the soul of the structure remained universal. The cone of poles, the hide covering, the central fire, the smoke hole. These elements were universal because they represented the optimal solution to a set of problems that couldn't be solved any other way, given the constraints of available materials and nomadic lifestyle. This wasn't cultural tradition for its own sake. This was engineering convergence. Every tribe independently arrived at essentially the same design because it was the best design possible. Like how birds and bats and insects all evolved wings despite having completely different ancestors, because wings are the optimal solution to the problem of flight. The tipi is the optimal solution to the problem of portable shelter in a harsh environment. Everything about plains life revolved around the buffalo. Those great herds that once numbered in the tens of millions that darkened the plains like moving seas of brown and black when they migrated, that were so numerous that early European accounts describe them taking 3 days to pass a single point, an unbroken river of animals flowing across the grasslands. The buffalo migrated with the seasons, driven by instincts older than human memory, older than human presence on this continent. North in summer seeking fresh grass and cooler temperatures, following the retreat of winter as it pulled back toward the pole. South in winter, seeking areas with less snow where grazing was still possible, where the wind blew hard enough to keep some areas relatively clear. The people followed, had to follow. Their entire existence depended on access to buffalo. Without buffalo, there was no life on the plains, not for humans. The environment was too harsh, too extreme, too unforgiving, without the concentrated resources that buffalo represented. This meant mobility, constant mobility. Camps had to be moved frequently, every few weeks at minimum. Sometimes every few days, if the herd moved unexpectedly, if hunting depleted local populations, if water sources dried up or became contaminated. And this mobility shaped everything. Shaped the tipi design itself. Shaped what people could own. Shaped how knowledge was preserved. Shaped the entire structure of society. The tipi met the requirements of this mobile life perfectly. A skilled woman. And remember that tipi construction and ownership was women's work, women's responsibility, women's power. Could erect a tipi in under an hour with the help of one or two others. Two women working together, knowing what they were doing, moving with the efficiency that comes from having performed the same task hundreds of times, could have a tipi up and functional in 30 minutes or less. 30 minutes from bare ground to weatherproof shelter, warm enough to support life. Disassembly took even less time, maybe 15 minutes to bring down a tipi, fold the hides, bundle everything for transport. An entire camp of 50 families could be packed and moving in 3 hours. 3 hours from decision to departure. Could cover 10 miles in a day if traveling conditions were good. 15 miles if pressed. Could set up a new camp before nightfall, have fires burning, and meals cooking before darkness made everything harder. This was life on the plains for thousands of years, following the herds, moving with the seasons, living in perfect harmony with the rhythm of the land and the animals that sustained them. But then, everything changed. Europeans arrived, and with them came diseases that swept through communities like wildfire. Smallpox, measles, influenza. Diseases against which the plains peoples had no immunity, no resistance, no defense. Entire families died in days or weeks. Whole camps were decimated. Knowledge holders disappeared overnight, taking with them songs and stories and techniques that had been refined over thousands of years. The population of some tribes was reduced by 90% in the span of a single generation. 90%. Imagine 9 out of every 10 people you know dying within a few years. The social fabric torn apart. The web of relationships that sustained life ripped to shreds. And yet, fragments of knowledge survived, held in the memories of those who lived long enough to develop some resistance, held by elders who had strong enough constitutions to survive where others died, practiced in modified forms when exact replication was impossible. The knowledge was passed down to those willing to learn, willing to remember, willing to preserve what had been, even if the complete picture was no longer available. Grandmothers teaching granddaughters, mothers teaching daughters. The chain of transmission continuing even as it grew thinner, more fragile. Some of that knowledge survives even today. Attenuated, yes. Fragmented, yes. Held by fewer and fewer people as each generation passes. But it persists. It refuses to die completely. There are still people who know how to brain tan a hide, who keep that knowledge alive through practice and teaching, who still know how to sew with sinew, who make their own needles from bone, who still know how to set up a tipi properly, who understand all the small details that make the difference between a tipi that works and one that doesn't. The knowledge is thinner now, more fragile, recorded in books and videos and digital files that help but can never fully replace direct transmission. But it persists, like embers that seem dead but retain heat in their cores, ready to burst back into flame with the right conditions. And the tipis themselves, though rare, now still exist, still functioning. There are families on reservations who set up tipis for ceremonies, for gatherings, for remembrance, for maintaining connection to a past that grows more distant with each generation, but never quite disappears. The tipi represents something important beyond its function as shelter. It represents 12,000 years of human ingenuity, 12,000 years of observation and experimentation and slow refinement, 12,000 years of people trying to survive in a harsh environment and succeeding through intelligence and cooperation and accumulated wisdom. It represents adaptation rather than domination, working with natural systems rather than trying to conquer them. Finding solutions that work within constraints rather than assuming that any limitation can be overcome with enough force. Modern architects are only now beginning to understand principles that were embedded in tipi design thousands of years ago. But we'll explore those principles soon. For now, just understand this. What you're experiencing, this warmth in winter, this safety in a harsh world, is not primitive. It's not simple. It's not some early stage of development that should be transcended and forgotten. It's the product of 12,000 years of human intelligence applied to the problem of survival. It's sophisticated. It's elegant. It's perfect within its constraints in ways that modern engineering with all its tools still struggles to match. Rest in that knowledge, in the understanding that you're lying under the product of millennia of refinement, that the warmth surrounding you was earned through countless generations of trial and error, that the structure protecting you represents the accumulated wisdom of 400 generations of people who lived and died on these plains. Sleep now. Let that history settle into your consciousness. Let the weight of 12,000 years of human ingenuity support you, keep you warm, and keep you safe. Sleep. But now, let's talk about something remarkable. Something that will change how you think about what's possible with simple materials and ancient knowledge. Let's talk about the engineering, the actual specific brilliant engineering that makes this whole system work. The wow facts. The moments of genius that modern scientists are only now beginning to fully understand and appreciate. Because when you really examine a tipi, when you understand what's actually happening inside these structures, you realize you're looking at technology so advanced, so perfectly adapted to its purpose, that it took modern engineers with computer modeling and advanced degrees centuries to rediscover principles that were embedded in this design thousands of years ago. Start with the most fundamental question. How does a cone of animal hide in temperatures of 30 degrees below zero maintain an interior temperature of 65 degrees with nothing but a small fire-burning dried dung? The answer is dead air. But not just any dead air. A carefully engineered system of trapped non-circulating air that creates an insulation barrier more effective than most modern materials. Between the outer hide wall and the inner liner, there's a space, 6 to 8 inches of empty air. This air cannot move, cannot circulate, cannot carry heat away through convection. It's trapped by the liner at the bottom and the convergence of the cone at the top. Dead air has an R value, a measure of thermal resistance, of approximately 1.0 per inch. 8 inches of dead air gives you an R value of about 8. For comparison, a modern insulated wall might have an R value of 13 to 15. But that wall is permanent heavy immobile. This is a portable structure made from organic materials that can be erected in 30 minutes. The genius is in the geometry. The cone shape creates a continuous envelope of dead air that has no weak points, no gaps, no places where cold can penetrate. And because the liner doesn't reach all the way to the peak, hot air can rise into the upper space, warming the entire envelope, creating a thermal battery that moderates temperature fluctuations. But the system doesn't just trap air. It moves air, deliberately, precisely. Look at the bottom of the liner. It stops about a foot above the ground. Cold air seeps in under the outer walls it must, because the fire needs oxygen. But that cold air hits the liner and stops, can't rise. It is trapped at floor level where it flows toward the fire pit. In sophisticated lodges, there's actually a trench, a channel dug into the ground running from outside the tipi under the edge of the outer wall all the way to the fire, an air duct built into the earth itself. Cold air flows through this trench, feeding the fire with fresh oxygen while staying at floor level where it can't rob heat from the living space above. The fire heats this air instantly. Hot air rises. It has no choice. It's obeying fundamental physics. It rises past the 7-foot mark, where the liner ends into the upper portion of the tipi, into that space between liner and outer wall. It circulates there, warming everything it touches, giving up its heat to the hides, to the dead air, to the entire thermal envelope. Then, as it cools slightly, it's drawn toward the smoke hole and exits pulled by draft by wind, creating pressure differential by the natural chimney effect. This is a convection system that works continuously without any mechanical assistance. No fans, no pumps, no electricity, just physics, just the natural behavior of hot and cold air exploited with perfect precision. The temperature gradient this creates is remarkable. At floor level, near where cold air enters, it might be barely above freezing. 35 degrees, 40 degrees. At chest height, where people sit and work, it's comfortable. 60 degrees. Up near the smoke hole in that upper space that serves as a heat reservoir, it's 70 or even 80 degrees. This gradient isn't a flaw. It's intentional. It's brilliant. The hot air at the top creates a thermal battery, a reservoir of warmth that moderates temperature swings, that keeps the entire system stable even as the fire burns down during the night. Now look at the smoke flaps, those triangular extensions at the peak that can be adjusted from outside using poles. They're not just decorative. They're not just functional. They're aerodynamic devices that wouldn't be out of place on a modern aircraft. The flaps can be angled to create a venturi effect, a narrowing that increases air velocity that pulls smoke out even in still air. On windy days, they can be positioned to prevent downdrafts that would blow smoke back inside. On very cold nights, they can be partially closed to reduce heat loss while still maintaining enough draft to keep the fire burning cleanly. The person who designed this system understood fluid dynamics at an intuitive level that wouldn't be formally documented by scientists until centuries later. Understood Bernoulli's principle before Bernoulli was born. Understood pressure differentials and airflow and the relationship between velocity and pressure. And they figured this out through observation and experimentation, through watching smoke and feeling drafts and noticing what worked and what didn't, through trial and error refined over thousands of years until the system was perfect. Now let's talk about the fuel. Buffalo chips, dried dung. It sounds primitive, doesn't it? Like something you'd burn only if you had no other choice. But buffalo chips are remarkable fuel. Here's why. A dried buffalo chip weighs almost nothing, maybe 8 ounces. But it contains concentrated energy. The buffalo's digestive system has already broken down. The grass has already processed the cellulose, has already extracted some nutrients, but left behind concentrated carbon compounds. When it burns, a single chip produces approximately 8,000 BTUs of heat. That's roughly equivalent to a pound of low-grade coal. One chip burning slowly can smolder for an hour or more, releasing steady heat without flame, without smoke, without the dangerous temperature spikes that come from burning wood. The smell is pleasant. This surprises people. But think about what a buffalo chip actually is. Digested grass. Grass that's been through 4 stomachs, that's been broken down by bacteria, that's been compressed and dried. When it burns, it smells like autumn fields, like dried hay with a hint of smoke. Earthy, organic, not unpleasant at all, and it's available everywhere the buffalo graze. You don't need to haul it from distant forests. You don't need special tools to harvest it. You just need to gather it, dry it, if it's fresh, stack it, where it won't absorb moisture. A family of 8 needs about 20 pounds of chips per night. That's perhaps 30 chips. 30 pieces of fuel that together weigh less than a newborn baby, but provide enough heat to keep 8 people alive through a night when the outside temperature is 50 degrees below zero. The engineering extends to everything, even the stones. The stones used for heating aren't random rocks. They're river stones carefully selected, smooth, uniform, dense. They've been tested, actually tested, to ensure they won't explode when heated, because some stones will explode violently. Stones with layers or cracks or different minerals compressed together will shatter when rapidly heated, sending sharp fragments flying like shrapnel. People have been blinded, killed by exploding stones, so the stones used in Tipis have been proven safe. Often they're stones that have been used for generations, passed down from mother to daughter, their safety verified by decades of use. When properly heated, these stones can reach temperatures of 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough that water dropped on them doesn't just evaporate. It dances, skitters across the surface in droplets that hover on a cushion of their own steam. Wrapped in hide and placed under buffalo robes, a heated stone releases warmth for 6 to 8 hours. It's a portable furnace. A battery of heat that doesn't require fuel, doesn't produce smoke, doesn't need attention. Just warmth. Pure, steady, reliable warmth radiating from thermal mass that took hours to heat and will take hours to cool. The hide covering itself is a technological marvel. Buffalo hide brain tanned, actually tanned using the animal's own brains, which contain exactly the right mixture of fatty acids and enzymes to preserve and soften the leather. The process takes days. The hide must be scraped clean of all meat and fat, then soaked in a mixture of brains and water, then wrung out and stretched repeatedly, worked until your hands ache, until the fibers are broken down and the leather becomes soft and supple. Then it's smoked, hung in a tipi-shaped frame filled with smoke from smoldering rotten wood, which contains natural chemicals that make the hide waterproof and prevent it from stiffening if it gets wet. The result is leather that breathes, allows water vapor to escape, but doesn't absorb liquid water. That's flexible enough to fold without cracking, even in extreme cold. That's strong enough to withstand 50-mile-per-hour winds without tearing. That will last for years with proper care. The sinew used for sewing comes from the buffalo's back, from the long tendons that run along either side of the spine. When dried and split into threads, this sinew is stronger than any thread humans would manufacture until the Industrial Revolution. A single strand can support 50 pounds of tension. When wet, it's pliable and easy to sew with. When it dries, it shrinks slightly, pulling the seam tight, creating a bond that's actually stronger than the leather it's holding together. Seams sewn with sinew are waterproof. The thread expands slightly when wet, filling any tiny gaps, preventing water penetration. But the seam still breathes, still allows water vapor to pass through. and pemmican, the ultimate survival food. Let's talk about the actual numbers, the actual science of why pemmican is one of the most remarkable food technologies ever developed. 1 pound of pemmican contains approximately 3,500 calories. Think about that. A fist-sized block of food contains enough energy to sustain an adult human through an entire day of hard work in freezing conditions. Modern military MREs, meals ready to eat, contain about 200 calories per pound. Modern energy bars contain about 1,000 calories per pound. Pemmican made with Stone Age technology contains 3 times the energy density of military rations and 3.5 times the energy density of modern energy bars. The ratio is crucial. Roughly equal parts by weight of dried meat powder and rendered fat. If you use too much meat, it's too lean, doesn't provide enough calories. Too much fat, and it becomes rancid, quickly turns toxic. But at the right ratio, it's stable. Will keep for years, decades even. There are documented cases of pemmican being recovered from abandoned camps after 20 years. 20 years. And still being perfectly edible, still nutritious, still capable of sustaining life. The fat is crucial. Fat contains 9 calories per gram compared to 4 calories per gram for protein or carbohydrates. In extreme cold, the human body needs fat, needs those dense calories, needs the sustained energy that only fat can provide. And in winter, when you're burning perhaps 4,000 calories per day, just maintaining body temperature and doing normal activities, that energy density matters. It's the difference between survival and slow starvation. Between having enough fuel to keep warm and running out of energy and freezing. Modern builders, modern architects, people with advanced degrees and computer modeling software are only now beginning to understand principles that were embedded in tipi design thousands of years ago, passive climate control using natural convection, creating thermal envelopes through dead air insulation, using thermal mass for heat storage, understanding fluid dynamics for smoke management, developing weatherproof breathable building materials from organic sources. We call it green building now, sustainable architecture, biomimicry. We act like these are new discoveries, cutting-edge innovations, revolutionary approaches. But the people who lived in Tipis understood these principles intimately, not through calculation or computer modeling, but through observation and experimentation and slow refinement over countless generations. They built structures that used 0 fossil fuels, produced 0 emissions, left 0 trace when abandoned. Structures that could be assembled in 30 minutes and disassembled in 15. Structures that were completely recyclable. The hides would eventually rot and return to the soil. The poles would decay and feed new growth. And they did it all with materials they could gather, harvest, process by hand. With technology that required no infrastructure, no supply chains, no industrial base. Just knowledge, just skill, just the accumulated wisdom of millennia. You're lying inside that wisdom right now. Inside, engineering so elegant, so perfectly adapted to its purpose, that it represents a kind of perfection that modern technology with all its power struggles to match. The warmth you feel isn't accidental, isn't lucky, isn't good enough. It's the product of genius, of countless small innovations refined over thousands of years, of a level of understanding about heat and air and materials that rivals anything we've achieved with our modern science. Rest in that, in the knowledge that you're surrounded by perfection, by technology that works flawlessly, not despite its simplicity, but because of it. by systems so well designed they need no maintenance, no adjustment, no intervention beyond basic tending. Sleep now, warm in the embrace of ancient engineering, safe within walls of knowledge refined over 400 generations, comfortable in technology that modern science is only now beginning to fully understand and appreciate. Sleep. But now, let's talk about something that matters even more than understanding the engineering. Let's talk about the actual practice, the daily reality, the lived experience of how warmth was distributed. Let's talk about people, about who sleeps where, about who stays warmest and who endures cold, about the invisible lines that divided this circle of tipis into a map of power and obligation, more revealing than any written constitution, any formal hierarchy, or any explicit statement of values. Because the camp you're imagining, that circle of 30 tipis arranged against the wind, wasn't equal, wasn't uniform. Each lodge held secrets about social structure that an outsider would never see, would never understand without living here for months or years, without watching the patterns of who visits whom, who brings what to whom, who defers to whom in the subtle dance of daily life. The temperature inside each tipi told a story. If you could have measured it, if you could have walked from lodge to lodge with a modern thermometer, you would have found a gradient, a map, a precise representation of social organization expressed not in words or laws or formal titles, but in degrees Fahrenheit, in the amount of fuel burned in the thickness of robes, and in the simple arithmetic of warmth. Let's start with Chief Running Wolf's tipi, that massive structure on the west side of the circle, 24 feet across instead of 12, twice the size of family lodges, using twice as many hides, requiring longer poles, occupying more space in the precious circle. Inside it, right now, while Red Willow Woman's family sleeps at a comfortable 65 degrees, the temperature approaches 80 degrees. 80. That's warm enough to sit comfortably in light clothing. Warm enough that Running Wolf doesn't need to wear buffalo robes inside his own lodge. Warm enough that when he wakes in the night, he doesn't feel the creeping cold that everyone else must fight. Why this difference? Why this inequality in a society that claims to value sharing, that teaches children that hoarding is shameful, that survival depends on cooperation? The answer reveals everything about how these communities organized themselves, about how they solved the problem of leadership without creating tyranny, about how they maintained inequality that served the community rather than oppressing it. Running Wolf's warmth is functional warmth, necessary warmth. His role requires that he wake refreshed, that his mind be sharp, that his judgment be unclouded by the fog of exhaustion that comes from sleeping cold. He mediates perhaps 3 or 4 disputes every moon, serious disputes, conflicts that could tear the community apart if mishandled. 2 hunters arguing about who killed an elk when both shot arrows that struck home. A woman claiming her husband beats her children too harshly. A young man wanting permission to court a girl from a family with long-standing grievances against his own. He consults with neighboring tribes about hunting territories. He decides when the camp should move, where it should go, how long it should stay. These decisions affect everyone. Move too early and you leave good hunting behind. Move too late and the buffalo have migrated beyond reach. He remembers alliances and feuds that go back decades, knows which families can't be camped near each other because of old grievances, must think clearly about consequences that extend years into the future. This work happens in his lodge. People come to him there, sit around his warm fire, present their cases. And the warmth matters. When disputants enter Running Wolf's lodge, when they feel that extraordinary warmth wash over them like a wave, they understand something immediately. They understand that this man is valued by the community, that his comfort represents collective investment, that his warmth is their warmth reflected back, created by their contributions. This creates psychological pressure toward accepting his judgments, not through intimidation, but through the simple recognition that if Running Wolf's judgment consistently favored the wealthy over the poor, his own family over others, people would stop bringing firewood. His lodge would grow cold. And cold lodges don't command respect. So Running Wolf's warmth is conditional warmth, performance-based warmth. He stays warm only as long as he earns it. Through fair judgment, through wisdom, and through service, the community values enough to literally pay for with their labor. The hardwood that burns in his lodge must be hauled from river valleys days away. Someone has to make that journey, has to spend days traveling, cutting wood, dragging it back over miles of difficult terrain. Why would a young man like Swift Runner spend 3 days hauling firewood for someone else when his own family needs fuel? Because he owes something. Because Running Wolf mediated a dispute that could have turned violent, made a judgment that gave Swift Runner's family access to resources they needed. That service created a debt, a social debt, an obligation felt rather than defined binding, despite having no formal structure. And now, in winter, that debt is being repaid, in firewood, in warmth, in the continuation of a relationship that benefits both parties. This is not corruption. This is the economy of reciprocity made visible through warmth, social insurance made tangible through temperature, the cost of governance expressed in firewood and labor. And it works. It distributes resources efficiently. It ensures that those who perform crucial functions have the comfort they need to perform them well. It creates incentives for good leadership and disincentives for bad leadership. But it only works because the system is self-regulating. Because the warmth must be earned continuously, must be justified by continued performance. If Running Wolf began to hoard warmth beyond what his role justified, if he made unfair judgments, people would stop bringing firewood. The flow of resources would slow, then stop. His lodge would grow colder, and eventually, people would start going to someone else for mediation. The title would mean nothing without the function. The position would be empty without the performance. The warmth is conditional, contingent. It exists only as long as the service continues. Now let's look at another form of inequality, one that might seem even stranger. Lone Bear's lodge sits on a slight rise north of the center. Inside it, temperature hovers around 75 degrees. Warmer than most family lodges. Warmer than lodges housing strong hunters who provide meat. Lone Bear contributes nothing physical to survival. He can't hunt, can't haul firewood, can't even help with camp work. Yet people bring him premium fuel. Women bring him the best pemmican. Children check on him multiple times daily. Why? Because Lone Bear is a library. A living library in a culture without writing. He remembers 70 winters of accumulated experience. He remembers which roots can be eaten when food runs out. He remembers songs that contain medical knowledge, songs about childbirth, injury, disease. His warmth preserves irreplaceable knowledge. If Lone Bear dies, entire categories of information die with him. songs that won't be sung again, stories that won't be told, techniques that will be lost. The community keeps him warm not from sentiment, but from calculated investment in knowledge preservation. What Lone Bear holds in his mind is worth more than any amount of physical labor. Watch as a young woman named Morning Bird visits just before sunset. She's brought stew carried carefully across the camp. She enters respectfully and sits near his sleeping platform. "Grandfather," she says, "will you teach me the song of difficult births? My sister's time is coming soon, and the midwives say the baby sits wrong." Lone Bear nods slowly. His voice is thin but clear, and he begins to sing. A song in archaic words preserved only in these medical songs. A song that describes how to turn a breech baby, how to recognize when the cord is wrapped, how to help when labor stops progressing. Morning Bird listens with complete attention, committing to memory knowledge that might save her sister's life. This exchange, this transfer of knowledge from old to young, this is why Lone Bear stays warm. When Morning Bird leaves, she brings more firewood, not because anyone required it, but because that's how it works. Knowledge flows down, warmth flows up. The exchange is constant, balanced, maintained through mutual understanding. Now look at a third type of lodge, Swift Runner's family. He's 25 winters old, strong and capable. His wife is skilled at hide work. They have 2 young children. They're productive members of the community, contributing more than they consume. Yet their lodge maintains 62 degrees on cold nights, cooler than running wolves, cooler than lone bears. They burn buffalo chips primarily with only occasional wood. They sleep under fewer robes, huddle together more tightly, accept discomfort that others don't face. Are they being exploited? Is this injustice? No. They're investing. Every piece of firewood they haul to Running Wolf represents future security. When Swift Runner has a dispute someday, Running Wolf will remember winters when Swift Runner provided fuel without being asked. That memory will influence judgments through natural human reciprocity. Similarly, time spent sitting with Lone Bear learning songs and stories represents investment in cultural capital. Swift Runner is learning to be an elder, learning how to hold and transmit information that will give him value decades from now when his body can no longer hunt, when all he'll have to offer is memory. And in a society without writing, memory is everything. The inequality in warmth isn't random. It's functional, performance-based, constantly evaluated by the community and adjusted through the simple mechanism of who brings firewood to whom. This creates stability. A chief who becomes tyrannical loses his warmth before he loses his position. The temperature in his lodge drops before anyone explicitly rebels. The cold serves as warning, as feedback, as correction mechanism. Similarly, an elder who stops sharing knowledge finds visitors stopping contributions, diminishing his lodge, growing colder until he resumes proper behavior or freezes in his selfishness. The system is self-regulating, self-correcting. It needs no police, no courts, no written laws, just the simple arithmetic of warmth allocation. Who burns hardwood and who burns dung, who sleeps at 80 degrees and who at 60. But there's another category, a darker category. People who fall outside the system entirely, who have neither functional warmth, nor invested warmth, nor preserved warmth. A widow with no children, an orphan with no family, someone shunned for violating taboos. These people, if they exist at all in the camp, sleep coldest. Their lodges hover barely above freezing. 40 degrees, 35. Just warm enough to prevent immediate death, but cold enough to be constant misery. They burn the poorest fuel, wear the oldest robes, eat the worst food, not because the community is cruel, but because the system of reciprocity has no place for them. They have no obligations owed to them and have created no debts that must be repaid. They exist outside the network of relationships that creates warmth. And without that network, they survive only on the margins, only barely. Sometimes the community takes them in anyway, from charity or religious obligation, assigns them to families who need extra labor, gives them a chance to rebuild social capital. But sometimes they're simply tolerated, allowed to survive on scraps until cold or hunger claims them. This is the dark edge of the system, the cost of organizing society through reciprocity. If you can't create obligations, if you can't participate in the economy of favors and debts, you freeze, literally freeze. The metaphor becomes reality. Social death becomes physical death. The circle of tipis seen from above would show a gradient of warmth mapping precisely onto social structure. The chief is warmest, valued elders next, productive families in the middle, young families investing in their future, accepting some discomfort. Marginal individuals are the coldest, existing on the edge. The temperature tells the story of social organization more clearly than any written hierarchy. And everyone knows their place in this gradient, knows it not through being told, but through feeling it, through the temperature they sleep in, through the fuel they burn, through the robes they wear. Social structure becomes tangible, touchable, measured in degrees Fahrenheit rather than abstract status. This is what makes the system powerful. You can't argue with temperature. You can't pretend you're valued if your lodge is cold. You can't claim high status while burning dung when others burn hardwood. The physical reality of warmth distribution makes social reality undeniable, and it makes change possible in ways rigid hierarchies don't allow. If Swift Runner performs great service, people start bringing him better fuel. His lodge grows warmer, not through promotion or ceremony, just through accumulated decisions by community members. The temperature rises before his status formally changes. Similarly, a chief who fails sees his warmth decline before he loses his position. The firewood deliveries are slow. The quality decreases. His lodge grows colder. He feels his status slipping before anyone says a word. The temperature gives him warning and the opportunity to correct course. The system provides feedback continuously, constantly, accurately. The warmth you receive reflects the value you provide, updated daily through countless small decisions aggregated into a temperature that tells you exactly where you stand. Now, as you drift deeper into sleep, understand what you've learned tonight. These people living in hide tents on frozen plains organized themselves with sophistication, rivaling any modern system. They created accountability without bureaucracy, performance evaluation without formal reviews, status hierarchies without rigid class systems. They maintained inequality that served function rather than ego, and that distributed resources efficiently rather than concentrating them among those with power. They built social structures flexible enough to adapt, rigid enough to provide stability, transparent enough that everyone understood where they stood. The warmth you feel even in imagination is never just about temperature. It's always about relationships, about obligations honored and debts repaid, about community functioning as it should, distributing resources according to need and contribution and role. The tipi circle is not just shelter. It's society made visible. It's power made tangible. Its hierarchy expressed through the simple, undeniable reality of warmth distribution. And in that way, it might be more honest than our modern hierarchies, where wealth and comfort often have no connection to service, where inequality exists without justification, where some sleep warm while contributing nothing, and others freeze despite working constantly. Where warmth is hoarded without earning, enjoyed without reciprocation, maintained without the constant renewal that kept plain societies functional for thousands of years. Rest, sleep. Let these thoughts drift through your mind, like smoke, like heat rising carrying truth that doesn't need words to be understood, that can be felt rather than explained. Sleep. The night is deep now. The deepest part. Those hours just before dawn when the fire burns lowest and the cold presses hardest against every barrier humans have erected against it. Outside, the temperature has dropped even further. 50 below now, perhaps 55 below, perhaps lower still. At this temperature, this is not just cold. This is something else entirely. Something beyond human language to properly describe. This is cold that would stop your heart in minutes, freeze your blood in your veins, end life not gradually, but suddenly, not through slow decline, but through immediate shutdown of essential systems. But inside Red Willow Woman's tipi, inside Running Wolf's lodge, inside every shelter in the circle, life continues. The stones beneath the buffalo robes are still releasing heat. Less than before, yes. Their temperature has dropped, but still present, still giving, still fulfilling the function they were given hours ago when they were heated in fire and wrapped in hide and placed with care. A gentle warmth that speaks of forethought, of preparation, of humans caring for other humans across time. The fires are low. Just coals now in most lodges, glowing faintly in the darkness, barely visible. But they're alive. They haven't died. Come morning, with dried grass and breath and patient coaxing, they'll return to flame, would provide heat for another day, will continue the cycle that keeps people alive. The people sleep. Dreamlessly, most of them, deeply, bodies pressed together under heavy robes, sharing warmth, creating warmth. 8 bodies in a tipi generate substantial heat. Enough heat that together with the stones and the coals and the insulation, it's sufficient. It's enough. It's always been enough. For 1,000 winters, for 10,000 winters, this is how people survived. Together, in circles, sharing warmth, sharing obligation, sharing the burden of survival that would crush any individual, but that a community can bear indefinitely. And now, it's time to return, time to come back, back from this frozen world, back from the circle of tipis on the endless plains, back to your own time, your own warmth, your own safety. Feel yourself rising slowly, not waking, not yet, just rising. Drifting up through layers of time like rising through water, through years and decades and centuries, through the historical layers that separate us from them, that make them seem distant and alien and fundamentally different, even though the bodies are the same, the needs are the same. The fundamental humanity is unchanged. The tipis fade behind you, growing smaller, growing distant, becoming memory rather than experience. But their lesson remains. The understanding that warmth, real warmth, is always shared, always created in community, always part of something larger than just yourself. That the temperature of a space is never just a physical fact. It's a social fact. It reflects relationships, reflects obligations honored and debts repaid, reflects community functioning as it should, as it must, if survival is to be achieved. You're back now, in your own bed, your own room, your own comfortable temperature-controlled space, your own time where warmth comes from technology rather than community, from systems rather than relationships. Feel grateful for that, for the ease of it, for not having to gather buffalo chips or heat stones or bank fires, for not having to maintain complex networks of obligation just to stay warm, for being able to sleep alone if you choose, for having warmth at the turn of a dial, at the press of a button, without depending on anyone else. That's real. That's valuable. Don't diminish it. But remember what you learned. Remember that the people in the Tipis, with their hide walls and buffalo robes and carefully rationed fuel, they were not suffering. They were not barely surviving, not enduring lives of misery and hardship and deprivation. They were living, fully, completely. They had something we've lost, the certainty of community, the knowledge that others would keep them warm and that they would keep others warm in return. The understanding that survival is always collective, always shared, and always about relationships rather than possessions. Perhaps, in your own life, there are ways to recreate that, to build circles, to share warmth in ways that matter, to acknowledge obligations, to participate in reciprocity, to remember that none of us truly survive alone. Perhaps that's what the tipis really teach, not how to survive winter on the frozen plains, but how to survive at all, how to be human, how to live together, how to create the bonds that make life worth living, that make warmth more than just temperature, that make home more than just shelter. Together, always together. Thank you for joining me tonight, for this journey back through time, back to the winter camps of Native Americans on the Great Plains, back to a world where survival was earned every single day through knowledge and work and community. I hope this story helped you find some peace, some rest, as your own day comes to an end. I hope it gave you something to think about warmth, about community, about what we've gained and what we've lost in our modern comfort. If these stories help you, if they bring you comfort, if they help you sleep, consider sharing them with someone else who might need that same peace, that same moment of calm at the end of a difficult day. And remember, wherever you are, whatever challenges you face, you're not alone. Like those people in the winter camps, like those families huddled in tipis against the killing cold, we all depend on each other, more than we usually acknowledge, more than our modern world encourages us to recognize. Until next time, sleep well, take care of each other, and remember that warmth, real warmth, is always something we create together. This is Peter Miller. Good night.